Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Wednesday, July 16th, 2025, and today we are going to be taking a look at a brand new poll from Fabrizio, Lee & Associates. It's a poll from Donald Trump's primary pollster in the last election. Fabrizio and Bob Ward, Tony Fabrizio, he was the key pollster, the chief pollster, as I should better put it, for Donald Trump's re-election, Donald Trump's 2020 campaign, and Donald Trump's 2016 campaign, who their campaign relied on heavily for an understanding of where the American public was. Where are they in terms of battleground districts? Where are they in terms of approval of Donald Trump? How do they feel about different provisions in the bill? That's what right now is being currently reported to the Trump campaign and the Republican Party at large. But Politico got access to this memorandum. They got access to take a look at what they are seeing in terms of Donald Trump districts. These are districts that were battlegrounds in the last election, but ultimately went to Donald Trump by an average of 4 percentage points across the board. And what they find might surprise you. The generic ballot really does go across 28 different congressional districts. They find here that they were margins of 5% or less, and 13 won by both the Democrat and President Trump. You're talking about a good amount of districts that won in one way or the other. However, Donald Trump did win these districts by about 4 points in the recalled vote. What we find here in the generic ballot shows two different metrics. Amongst all voters in these districts, Democrats lead, yes, lead, amongst Trump plus 4 districts by margins of roughly 4 points. 3 points, rather. Amongst those who are 10 out of 10 motivated to vote, however, the Democratic advantage expands to a massive 7 percentage points across the board. 7 percentage points. Yes, you heard that correctly. And about 65% of these voters in competitive districts call themselves 10 out of 10 motivated to vote. Now, you might be surprised to see that 65% of voters are saying they're 10 out of 10 motivated. It actually is quite rare for any metric across the board to say that this many highest percentage of voters do believe they are extremely motivated to vote. But I do actually believe it in these specifically competitive congressional districts simply because it makes sense. These are districts that are constantly bombarded with campaign visits, campaign advertisements, investments, because they are on the margins, the ones that can flip towards the Democrats or Republicans in the House elections. And so there often is a way more engaged electorate in the states that matter more. You'll find that to be true. Georgia will have a higher turnout margin than North Dakota simply because the state is invested in more and people feel like their vote actually matters. Same thing in these congressional districts. But it is phenomenal news for Democrats on one end that you are finding that amongst a Trump plus 4 electorate, seemingly, Democrats win by 3. That's about a 7-point swing from the last election. But amongst those who are 10 out of 10 motivated, it's a 9-point swing. Why? An 11-point swing, actually, because it's a 7-point margin in favor of Democrats and a 4.1 in favor of Trump. And it is interesting, right? Looking at the way that so many voters are actually motivated. And what it actually tells us, too, is exactly what we could have seen when we've taken a look at the elections that have taken place in between Donald Trump being inaugurated and today. When you take a look at the amount of Democrats who turned out in the Virginia primary, way more than Republicans. When you take a look at the amount of Democrats that turned out in the Wisconsin Supreme Court race, well, about 70% of the 10-point margin that we saw Crawford win by was decided by just turnout. Simply just who was turning out versus who wasn't. About 30% of that was persuasion. So 3 points across the state was persuasion of Trump voters to Democrats. But 70% of that was just simply that Democrats were more motivated to turn out in contrast than Republicans. And that's the big fear here. Fabrizio Ward saying that the GOP is in a way sleepwalking. And that is the best way to put it. They are slowly walking into electoral defeat because they do not have the motivation to get up out of bed and vote on Election Day, November 2026. And he's raising the alarm bells, saying Donald Trump needs to give Democrats, Republicans rather, the reason to vote, the same way he did in the last presidential election. But Donald Trump knows that when he's not on the ballot, turnout goes down amongst his base. Same thing we saw with Obama. Obama had phenomenal victories in 2008 and arguably even 2012 in hindsight. A map like this one was what ushered in Obama's first 2 years in office. But when you removed Obama from the ballot, a lot of those voters just simply didn't turn out to vote. In the 2008 election, Democrats saw the highest turnout they had seen in a very long time, about 62% across the country. Obama received the most votes of any candidate in U.S. history up to that point. But then, 2 years later, Democrats collapsed, lost 63 seats in the House, but remember, 62% turnout in the last presidential. But in 2010, turnout was down to 41% in the House. 41%. Then, 2 years later, Obama's winning it back, but the House becomes more difficult to win. Why? Republicans redraw the map and it becomes overwhelmingly in favor of the GOP. A lot of these districts went from being more lean and likely to being more safe for the GOP. But turnout was higher. Why? Obama was on the ballot. Then in 2014, turnout plummets again, and Democrats hit their lowest point in the 21st century in House representation. So then thinking about now, what's happening in 2026 is exactly that. The Republican Party base isn't motivated. One, because they have an incumbent, and two, because maybe they aren't exactly as excited about the things that Donald Trump is doing across the board. But that's where Donald Trump came in, just yesterday actually, telling the Texas Republicans that he wants 5 more seats out of the delegation. Because in the last election, the majority for the Republican Party was just 5. And if Republicans could take 5 seats from Democrats in Texas, chances are their odds of maintaining House control actually do go up quite a bit. Because on the margins, just shifting a state like Texas by 5 points means certainly none of the other districts will be competitive, and at the same time, it will be that Texas at large will give Republicans that buffer. In effect, they would be going into this 225 to 210, a 15-seat advantage, rather than a 5-seat advantage. That's a huge difference in terms of electoral math and electoral dynamics. Now, I don't think Texas will save the GOP from Democrats winning the majority in 2026. And that's exactly what this poll is also getting at too. That just on board here, while if written out, asking voters about different things in Donald Trump's tax provision and tax bill and the big beautiful bill, yes, they do support it. But ultimately, that isn't translating to Republican support across the board. You're going to find here that when they prime the question, if the Republican candidate for Congress supported moving working adults aged enrolled to Medicaid to a healthcare plan that they would purchase directly using a tax credit that allows them to afford the premium, would you be more likely to vote for the Republican candidate or the Democratic candidate? And so, of course, it is this type of priming that benefits, the Republican Party. But again, on the net, asking voters today, all other things being equal, if the election for Congress were held today, would you be more likely to vote for the Republican candidate or the Democratic candidate for Congress? All voters say Democrats +3. Motivated voters say Democrats +7. So let me visualize that to tell you a little bit about what that will actually look like. Well, coming off of Trump winning these districts by about 4 points to Democrats now leading it by about 3 amongst all voters, that itself is about a 7-point shift. So if we do that on the map here, just shift by 7 points, the majority goes from the Republicans to the Democrats, and Democrats go from 215 seats to 235, the exact number that they had in the 2018 midterm elections. Yes, 235 to 200. So a 7-point shift would actually benefit Democrats quite tremendously. But now let's give them an even better margin. Let's say it's just 10 out of 10 motivated voters on election day, which is unrealistic, but let's humor me for a moment. So if Democrats lead that by about 7 and Republicans won these districts by about 4, well, what you're going to find here is that Donald Trump's margin to where the Democrats would be in that hypothetical isn't about 11-point shift. So the map, again, goes from a Democratic majority, from Democrats to 215, from a Republican majority, from Democrats to 215, to Democrats at 242, significantly more than in 2018 when they were at 235. It would put Republicans down to about where Democrats were after the 2016 midterm elections. A lot of things would change here. And while some of this would probably be mitigated by Texas being drawn in favor of the GOP, ultimately speaking, the map here is conducive, based on what Fabrizio and Ward are telling us, to Democrats actually doing quite well in 2026. So these are the same pollsters that did Trump's reelect and did Trump's election 3 times. These are the same people that have been whispering into his ear. Run the Kamalas for they, them at it. Polls well amongst our constituents. Run this, run that. You need to be competing here. You need to be competing there. And they are very clearly saying the Republican Party is for all purposes sleepwalking into, yes, a midterm disaster. Because they got the 2024 election right. They were able to predict it, and they were able to poll and capture sentiments amongst voting groups, as many of the pollsters actually were able to that were doing internals for both campaigns. And what we are finding is that if they are right, if that motivated factor is right, Democrats could be reaching upwards of 240 to 242 seats. But assuming that it's just the baseline all voters shift. Democrats actually reached the same exact number that they got in the 2018 midterm elections, when they won nationally by about 9 points. Fascinating, to say the least. And it also sort of tracks here, too. If we're taking, Donald Trump districts that he won by 4 and shifting it in favor of the GOP, Democratic Party rather, by 7 points, gives them a national popular vote victory of about 5 points. Well, if the polls are underestimating Democratic support, as they have in some cases, well, it would be reasonable that Democrats would actually be winning across the board. And based on the margin of error across these states or districts that are being polled, it's about a 3.5 average percent margin of error. It very well could be a 5-point popular vote margin, just about 0.5% higher than what Joe Biden got in the 2020 presidential election. So, what Fabrizio and Ward are telling the Republican Party? Open your eyes. Take a look at what's happening even in the districts that you won, because you aren't popular in the way that you used to be. You aren't winning voters in the way that you used to be. And without Donald Trump on the ballot, the numbers here aren't running in the way that they need to be for the GOP. And they see it. Democrats see it. Republicans see it. And it's benefiting the Democratic Party today. And it will be for quite some time. And so I'd be interested to see how Fabrizio and Ward do more polls throughout the cycle. As they leak to Politico, as they get to the hands of journalists, what they tell us about the state of the race, because I actually do, for most purposes, trust the data they're putting out. And I do think that there's something to be gained from looking at what the incumbent party's main pollster is telling the said incumbent party about their status in elections. Because Fabrizio and Ward aren't here to BS Donald Trump. And even if they were, you wouldn't want to BS him by saying you're losing. You tell him he's winning. But evidently, he's not. And Democrats are in a good position right now to win back the House majority. The question is, does it get better? Does it get worse? Does Texas change things? Does California change things? And what does it look like in November of 2026? So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the top left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video for you to watch, and then a playlist for my 2026 House election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.